Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our conversation on Afghanistan and the GEM community. Earlier this year, I met Jill Kornetsky through an organization called HER Digital Incubator, which addresses the institutional funding gap for women and underserved entrepreneurs seeking tools and access to investor capital. And I had the honor of being Jill's mentor, and she and her mission just blew me away. Jill is a subject matter expert. She spent nearly 7 years in Afghanistan and saw an opportunity to bring Afghan minerals to the world in a way that's traceable, responsible, and supports the local economy. So, as we all know, a lot changed in August, especially for women, which is why we're having this conversation. So without further ado, Jill and everyone meet each other. Jill is the extraordinary human behind Persian Viking minerals.
Well, hi, everybody. Thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it. So my background is I came out of the hard sciences and wanted to get into more direct action on the ground. So I came to Afghanistan in 2015 with USAID. I did monitoring and evaluation of 4 or 5 different platforms. I quickly saw, sort of where the gaps are and why some of these programs are not being as effective as possible. So I went out into the private sector for a little while, and I saw the same problems, just a lack of information, a lack of real process behind what anybody was trying to do. So my goals in Afghanistan have always been to help the average people to sort of raise the standard of living. And the way I decided to do that was to look at one of Afghanistan's 2 or 3 major sectors and try to find the most profitable, and then use that as an engine for the other parts of the development. So in Afghanistan, you guys all probably know the gemstones are among the best in the world. They have everything but diamonds in good quantities. And yet it's been an industry in Afghanistan for 3,000 years, but it hasn't proved well for the people. It hasn't really paid out for the people. So my concept was to make a benefit corporation that would use raw stones initially, use the profits from raw stones to teach gem cutting. I'd like to develop a cottage industry similar to Jaipur or Bangkok, where Afghan women, and it becomes sort of a familial thing, women teach their daughters. And it's good, durable income for a population that does not make good income in Afghanistan. A house cleaner might make $50 a month. A police officer made $150. A driver might make $300. So there's a lot of room in there to give people a good day's pay for a good day's work. And then from those profits, from the rough and cut stones, we could go into the communities and do more of a whole of community approach. Because gemstones can't support everybody, and everybody needs work. So there's opportunities to invest in agriculture, in other forms of self-sufficiency, and ways to use the minerals and the natural resources for the people's benefit. So that was the plan. I was fundraising for angel investors and so on until August 15th. August 15th, the Taliban took Kabul. Things are a little different now, and the need is even greater. There's some things to remain to be seen about how to operate a business. So far, the Taliban have been recognizing visas and recognizing business licenses. Foreign journalists have been coming and going. Foreign private business owners have been coming and going. So while we're not 100% sure about taxation and such, nonprofits can function right now. And this week, a lot of nonprofits are sitting down with the Taliban and getting their permission to operate in country as needed, because they realize also there's not enough of them to feed a country of 35 million. So while I still intend to achieve those same goals, we're going to have to reorder them a little bit to better serve the people. So instead of going into the minerals first and the benefit corporation first, we're going to focus on the trade schools and the work floors. I'm going to build all-female work floors and trade schools in order to teach gemology and faceting and lapidary to the most vulnerable. Because if we're going to go through all the effort to teach people to cut, why not focus on the most vulnerable first? And those are going to be war widows. Those are going to be older girls orphaned by war, and other single female breadwinner families. I hope to extend that out into the war disabled community and the deaf community in time. But the first will be women. And we can do that starting immediately. So I've shifted from trying to get angel investors to shifting to donors. We just started a GoFundMe today. I've started meeting with different embassies, mostly out of Northern Europe and the Gulf. They show a lot of interest in supporting these kinds of initiatives, just not today, maybe in a month or two. If we can get the ball rolling on the crowdsourcing side and on some public interest or some industry specific interest, I think that could go faster. And the reason why I think it's very important that we do it as soon as possible is that there's a window here. This whole Taliban, the nice new change Taliban, this is a game, and everybody knows this is a game, but it's a game and it's a window. It's a window where they're saying to the international community, if you come and you do nonprofit things and hospitals and support, we're going to let you, we're not going to harass you, we're not going to bother you. They're going to keep that act up so long as it's financially and socially and politically advantageous to them. So if nobody comes in for the next 6 months and nobody tries to pursue these initiatives, then that window will close and the nice new changed behaviors will revert completely back to the old behaviors. So that is what I'm focusing on now and hopefully what we're going to talk about today.
Someone has asked, where are you currently located? Are you in Kabul?
I was in Kabul until August 26th. I was intending actually to stay on. However, one of my assistants was threatened by the Taliban. They went to his home and told him not to come home. And then his brother was killed a few days later, and we're not entirely sure why. So while he himself also intended to stay, with that development, he was obviously at risk, and he was never going to get out without an American passport holder. So I arranged for my exit, and I took him with me. He's currently at Ramstein, waiting for the measles outbreak to be dealt with, and then hopefully he'll be on to the US. So I've been home about a month. I still have staff in Kabul. I still have an office in Kabul.
Can you actually explain a little bit what your office looks like? Because when I was working with you, I felt like I kind of understood a little bit, but I think for a lot of people, it looks very, very different.
Yes.
And how we would operate here.
For sure. So there's a couple of things. Like Kabul, people think Afghanistan, they think mud huts and tents and devastation of the early 90s. And Kabul has developed into quite the metropolis. There's 7 million people, more or less. There's at least 500,000 structures. It's a thriving metropolis with high rises and a lot of businesses, which are now in limbo. But so in terms of the normal stuff, my building currently today continues to have city power, which is not 24 hours because there's not enough capacity for the country, but that's normal. So then we have generator power. The diesel is still being delivered. Food prices have doubled and tripled, but there are still foodstuffs available. In terms of our building, I happen to have found a great building in Kabul that's highly secure. The owner and several prominent people live there. The Taliban has been already approached and negotiated with to leave the building alone. And so far they've done that, and it seems like that will continue. It has blast doors. It has a 20-man armed guard staff, 24 hours a day. In addition, when we fundraise, we'll be putting additional steel doors on the units to take full safety. Also, in fundraising, I'm going to, for the pilot at least, keep it in that building because I know the owners, I've known them a long time. I know the neighborhood. I know the security situation around there. We'll do it out of different apartments in that complex. And then when we scale up, I'd like to build a facility, a real facility. But until then, working out of this building is actually a very safe offer. There's still services. It's still functioning like normal. So one of the major sort of market segment additions that I was trying to do was to do all of the certificate of origin testing at the Kabul facility before the gemstones leave. So rather than just a standard gemological certificate, which sometimes are problematic, and because it's Afghanistan, there's twice as much criticism, we can do those trace mineral analyses in-house if we can get the right equipment. I've worked with most of that equipment before. I was in biotech for 10 years, so all of those, the fancy shiny machines are kind of my happy place. So I think doing that would help ensure that we are not just contributing more, that these stones come from where we said they came from, that when we say it's a certain kind of stone or a certain kind of mineral trace, that it's true and we've got the lab results to back it up. That I've broken into two pieces. So we'll start with sort of a standard gem lab, really high, good quality, good equipment, good people. And then we'll move into that advanced testing, somewhat ironically, starting the women's initiative first. While it's not a for-profit endeavor, it's more of a nonprofit endeavor. The time it takes us to teach those women will give me the time to line up the other business contingencies that we need to deal with. And then by the time we're ready to sort of really jump into working with the stones every day, the real material will be selling, not practice stuff. I can also bring in the advanced lab. So as we're putting out stones, they'll still have that certification that I'm trying to do.
So right now you're just basically building the foundations for what the possibilities can be down the road.
Yeah, I'm very cautious of not overpromising, both to the people investing and also to the people I'll be working with. So I don't want to bring on my operations director. I have them all in mind. I have them all picked out. I know people I can trust. They've proven over time that they're trustworthy. But I don't want to tell them I'm going to bring them on until I have a couple of years of salary put aside in a special salary account. Just because that's what people have been doing to them for years. I think another reason why I started this endeavor was just to role model. Just you can be profitable and run things above board. You can treat your employees well and still be profitable. You can be environmentally and socially responsible and still be profitable.
I think another thing that will be discussed at some point is with Afghan gemstones is the terrorist designation piece. So
Yep.
can you speak a little bit about that?
Yep. So just yesterday, I was following the news. The US government, I believe it's the Treasury Department, I'll have to Google for exactly who, but they passed two waivers yesterday. One, they're both related to nonprofit efforts in Afghanistan. And so that would exempt people who are doing apolitical humanitarian type initiatives, whether that's work initiatives or feeding people, distributing food. They will be protected from potential prosecution. Like none of us want to go to The Hague for trying to feed Afghans. And the government's aware of that and they're putting things in place. So after that, I don't know if it was related to that, it may be, or separately. In Kandahar, Herat, and Kabul over the last 3 or 4 days, half a dozen or a dozen aid agencies, whether that's the UN or smaller organizations, have sat down with Taliban leadership and said, we need your permission to operate here without your interference and separately from your organization. And they've been agreeing to that across the board. So they know they need help and they know they're not going to spend any money on women specifically. So they're going to let somebody do it, but they have to come and do it. So I think that is our window to make sure we still have a foot in the door. We're still operating as a nonprofit, so we're not pushing those buttons. But once we're 100% sure that businesses can operate without any legal complications or without potentially supporting the wrong people, we'll already be there, we'll already be operating, and we can move right into the next phase.
Well, but ultimately what you're creating is something that's sustainable for women, but in the shorter term, it's a nice way to kind of get them into a safe space.
Yeah, that's very true. There's, Kabul University and American University, so far as I know, have been completely abandoned. They've appointed Taliban leadership for those two organizations. I don't know if that's going to bring students back or not. Some are going back to classes, some are not. It's there's very much a sense of waiting. Everybody's waiting for the shoe to drop, waiting for someone else to take the lead. So there's a lot of stagnation in that. And then, as we've heard, all of the girls over the age of puberty are being asked not to come to school until they can find separate accommodations for them. So those are some of the girls we can potentially work with. The space will be all female. I mean, there will be some men in the organization, but they will be segregated in space. It's a good opportunity I'm going to do a pilot of maybe 25 women and hopefully expand into 250 or more. It's an opportunity to show, look, a foreigner can come here, they can employ these women, they can feed these women, they can support these women's families. They're not teaching anything immoral. They're not teaching any critical or, subjects that can be criticized or subjects that can be called into question. And another benefit of that, a trade school model, is the future work potential in Afghanistan. If we pump out 50,000 university educated women, I don't know where they're going to work when they graduate. So let's focus on the sectors where labor is needed and where people can benefit. The kinds of salaries we're talking about is enough to support their whole family in the current economy.
So far as how the community that is here can help, what would that look like?
We are doing a fundraiser, and of course need to fundraise actual funds. Aside from actual funds and cross promotion and maybe sharing that with your networks, I'd appreciate it very much. Different kinds of support in terms of setting up those relationships. I haven't started the trade circuit, the GEM trade show route yet myself. I hope to do that this year. Helping to make connections with future potential buyers, with maybe in-kind support. I know we'll need different kinds of things I'm not great at: website, accountancy, financial, legal, even just good connections to people who might want to help in those areas would be great for us.
I know you've kind of been in talks with a lot of the embassies in Northern Europe, and there's some sort of family foundations and things that are that have expressed interest. Would you suggest the GoFundMe campaign to support you, or what would that look like?
Yeah, for sure. The GoFundMe, I think GoFundMe works for a lot of people because you can watch the tracker and etc. If anybody wanted to donate privately, we've set up the PayPal to do that. I've set up a Patreon account that I hope to, when we're actually active, post pictures, within margins of safety of what we're doing and who we're working with. In terms of foundations, any connections that people have to foundations that are open to funding in places like Afghanistan. Some of them have mandates or are concerns that prohibit them from engaging here. But I know that there's support out there for this. I know people want to help Afghan women. I know people in the gem trade know the value of what's underground and the potential there. I think if we can get these roads to cross, we can help out a lot of people. So yeah, any diplomatic contacts, any contacts in the foundation world, any private family offices or family foundations who might support this in advance of nailing down those business parameters and moving into a for-profit seed or Series A round to raise for that component.
Oh. Okay, here someone says you have a very difficult road ahead of you. Wow, quite admirable what you were trying to get done. Exactly. That's why when I first met Jill, I thought, oh my gosh, this is so challenging. Yet there's someone who is so capable, and if there's anyone who's capable of doing this, it's Jill. I mean, it's and to just sort of turn your back on these communities isn't exactly the right thing to do either. So we're all trying to figure out how can we shape this? How can we make this a possibility for these remote areas of the world and certainly the women of Afghanistan.
Yeah, I really appreciate your support. I really appreciate your kind words. It's definitely not, there are plenty of easier places I could probably do similar things. But to be honest, I knew Afghanistan was a difficult place when I went there. And in the first 6 months, I said, well, we'll see if I'm really, cut out for these kinds of ambiguities and uncertainties. And I am. I work there. I do good work there. And after much hard-earned learning and learning through fire testing, I've gotten the games, I've gotten the culture, I've built up really great networks of people that I would like to help and support. And especially now, I think the need is greater than before. I think the number of people who are going to want to come back and spearhead these kinds of things just fell off a cliff. And the agencies and the bilateral aid agencies are interested, but not quite ready to support because they have to figure out their legal structures. So I'm thinking if we can get this ball rolling using the crowdsourcing platform and show some serious interest, show that people want this and want to support this and want to, in small ways or big ways, show that they think this is a good idea and we'd like to move forward, I think that will help me get those embassies and things over the last hurdle. There are very no promises, but we like what you're doing. It's especially Northern Europe. They like smaller programs. They like direct community action. They like not these huge platforms, but just small organizations doing effective things. So if we can get the crisis funding I'm asking for is mostly to keep the staff fed and safe and housed, the ones who are in Afghanistan and the ones, my assistant who I got out. And then anything beyond that is going to go to stepwise reopening things, reopening the office, expanding the footprint, bringing on senior staff, and then starting to do the equipment that we're going to need. The faceting machines, we're going to need computers so they can do just basic language learning and simple skills learning. And in order to be safe, because so far things are safe. My people in Kabul say they look out the window and things are completely normal. Food is expensive, otherwise everything is normal. So that said, if I can reduce the number of times these women are out in public moving, whether from home back and forth, so I'm also including housing for them. They're not locked in, they can go home if they want, but if they feel safer not traveling every single day, I want to make sure I have a place for them to sleep too.
Right. Well, I think that's one thing that makes you unique in solving this problem, because you were there for so long and you have connections, you understand how to get things done, who's a time waster, who's, all of those things. And so in many ways, you kind of have a vetted, trusted group of people surrounding you there in that community, but also they trust you too.
Yeah, it was always tricky trying to get people to understand what I'm doing at first, because so many Americans were there doing high level consulting or trying to make business, trying to provide services to a military or an embassy, because that's, big dollar contracts. And I was sitting in a room with them in my own house saying, look, let's figure out a way to use what you're already doing to benefit you more. Like, you're already bringing stones out of the ground. You're telling me about them all the time. You're bringing me things to look at. I don't have a structure set up to buy and sell those in a way that's useful for you. But let's work together and let's do that. And instead of coming at it through elites who know a white beard, who know a family, who know a miner, I can just talk to the miners. Like, between my assistant and other people I know in the community, just going straight to the actual community members and saying, look, you're doing this hard work. I know how hard you work. I know how little you make for it. Let's work together. Let's figure out how to do your work better. Once I get started, I've got some ideas for reducing or eliminating the amount of explosives they use, replacing them with some simple equipment. They're very open to these kinds of things, but they don't know where to get the knowledge. They're not going to deal with import, export, and taxes and paperwork because it's just too much paperwork. It's a literacy problem. It's a familiarity with modern processes problem. But they've said, if you bring these things and you come and you stand next to us, then we'll be partners. All they need is some simple equipment, and then we've got the whole mine take to work with. So from there, I think we can benefit everybody. I think we can bring really beautiful stones to the West, straight out to the West with certificates, with reliability and responsibility. I think we can give the people taking the stones out of the ground a way better life. I think we can give the people cutting the stones, hopefully these women, a way better life. And then through that platform, because we're there, because we've got the local knowledge and we're locally active, sort of the sky's the limit on what we can do and what kind of programs we can implement.